on reading. As you will see behind me, if you are watching the video of this, I have books behind me, quite a lot of books just visible, but around me a whole library of 8,000 books here and some thousands of books elsewhere. And this is the main form of learning in my profession as an academic, through reading what other people have said. And I was apparently, according to my mother, a very slow reader when I was a child. At 6 or 7, she was offering me bribes if I showed some interest in reading. She would give me some extra pocket money. And I don't know why that was, laziness or incapacity, but gradually I did learn to read and began to enjoy it. That moment when you can read for yourself and it suddenly takes off occurred, I suppose, when I was 7 or 8. And from then on, I've not been an immense reader. When I talked to some of my colleagues, they had read more by the age of 15 than I've read now, as far as I can see. But I've read my share. I try to do some reading every day, though it's more difficult now because of other pressures and the internet and so on. But I enjoy reading, and you just have to open a good book, and of course you are away in a different world. And my reading is often directed. I am working on some problem or project, and so I get down the books on that subject and I work my way through. And I've learnt a few things about reading. One is the very obvious one, which was a point made by his essay on reading by Francis Bacon, I think, where he said that books are not to be all read in the same way. Different books should be approached as entirely different objects. Some books, he said, you just open them, flick through them, get the general gist and put them down. There are other books which you read very carefully in certain parts and then skip around and so on. And then there are other books which you have to read every word, and often 2 or 3 times before you have taken out the message of those books. It's very like any kind of activity humans do, like eating. Some foods you eat very fast and some you eat very slowly. You need to be cut in small pieces. So you should read, you should decide what you're going to do. A second thing which I advise my students is to think about why you're reading the book a little bit, if you can, just before you do it. What do I want to get out of this reading, a book or an article? And then you can focus on that. If you just want to get the general argument, you can go through it quickly. If you want to get facts out, you can dip in and find some facts. If you want to enjoy it, then read it fairly slowly. Novels and things like that, or poetry, you can't skip out or skip through. You have to read every word. So in terms of those books where you feel that you just want to read through, it's a longish book, but you don't want to spend more than a day on it, and if you read every word, it would take you much longer. You think about what you want out of it. You look at the chapter structures. You see which are the more important and interesting looking parts, whether there are conclusions to the chapters, whether there's a conclusion at the end which will summarize the argument. And then you can read parts of it quite quickly. I took fast reading classes at some point in my life, and all I can remember from them was that it said that one way to read a page in a few seconds is to read the first sentence of each paragraph, which often states what's going to be in the paragraph, and then read down diagonally, start at the top left, go down to the bottom right, just sweep your eye across and certain patterns and words will emerge, and quite often it'll alert you to the fact that this is an interesting, important paragraph, or that there's nothing happening much and you can move on. And in that way you can read quite fast. I was enormously impressed when I was doing my doctorate at Oxford by having a supervisor, Keith Thomas, who was an enormous reader, read vast amounts, and he would often read extremely carefully. He's read many of my books and put in all the commas and full stops and mistakes, so he can read with immense attention. But I also saw him reading books, gutting them, as I think I called it, rather like taking out the insides of a fish. That is to say, he would just flip over the pages, almost a few seconds a page, and finish. I used to sometimes ask him how he could do that, and he said, well, once you build up a good deal of knowledge, then each new book you read probably will only contain a small addition to that knowledge. So very quickly you can see whether you're going to learn anything much new from this, and if you are, it may be in selected bits. So I've found myself in that position as well now. I can read books much more quickly, because usually I have encountered the arguments before and I know something about the subject, and so I can pile up 15 books, and in a day or two I've taken out what I want from them. The last thing to say about reading is that there's the question of retention, because you can read a book and then a few days or weeks later you've forgotten everything in it. People have different ways of overcoming that. One way I use is, if it's my book, I sideline in pencil throughout my life. If it's fairly interesting, one sideline; if it's two, a couple of sidelines; and if it's really interesting, 3 sidelines. So when I come back and want to skip through the book, I can see the book's parts that were interesting. I also tend to sometimes put the date of the readings at the front, particularly with books which I think I'll read several times, because often I pick up a great book like Montaigne's Essays, and I found I've read it twice already, but it was quite a long time ago, so it's worth having another read. And then, of course, there's one further stage. You sideline things, and the historian Christopher Hill told me that he would then, at the end of the book, put some sort of index, so it would give the page numbers and short subject of things that had interested him in the book. And later, when he came to write, he would know in which book he'd read something, and he had his own personal index, which wasn't necessarily the one in the book, and certainly with old books that don't have indexes. That's something else you can do. I tended to take notes onto sheets of paper or onto small cards, and so I built up a very large set of 40,000 paper slips linking to all the books that I've read and the articles and so on, and that is all now in a computer database, so I can look up a theme that has gone through my work or life and find references in many of my books and articles. So there's a lot you can do with reading, and many people predicted the end of reading, the end of books and so on over the last 15-20 years, and I was not convinced that it was the end of any of these things. And although there have been huge changes, the book is still one of the most compressed, effective ways of conveying ideas. And although the Gutenberg galaxy, the Gutenberg revolution of printing may be over, and we may live in the internet age, the old medium continues, and reading for many people is a delight, and therefore encouraging young people to read, as many parents do, is really worthwhile, because it's a portal into many different kinds of world, and a constant source of relaxation and pleasure and knowledge.